Thanks for your help this morning, Anna. Looks like we are successfully on YouTube.
Okie dokie, let me switch.
Thanks for your help this morning, Anna. Looks like we are successfully on YouTube. And now I'm hearing myself talk. I don't know why that is.
Switch. You see here.
I was getting feedback from myself there, Anna. Do you know if that was that on? Did you hear that as well? Did you hear me twice? I'm not getting it
Yes,
anymore.
that was because I had YouTube. I was working
I
on
see.
YouTube on the other side,
Got
and
it.
I didn't
Of course.
turn it on. Okay.
Of course. That makes
now
sense.
You don't, right?
No, now it's good. Now I'm good. So.
Okay, so just the last thing, I did not get any persons contacting me for public comment for today's hearing.
Yep. Okay. That sounds good. Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Have a great day. Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 8:57. Mr. Rossi, I believe it's Mr. Atencio from PNM. Are you both with us?
Good morning, sir. Yes, Nicholas Rossi for PRC staff.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Chris Atencio for PNM.
Good morning. Good to see you both. Thank you for being here. I did want to ask if either of you had anything to address before we go on the record. Mr. Rossi, I did have one question for you, if you would be so kind. Could you tell me how to pronounce your witness's last name?
I believe it's Zadalis, but I would prefer him to correct me.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I see Dr. Zadalis on the call. If that's not the way to pronounce your name, sir, please let me know.
That is correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And any preliminary items before we go on the record, Mr. Atencio or Mr. Rossi?
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Just one minor thing to draw to your attention. We had some issues last week with uploading the exhibits. And because of that, the sequential numbering is a little out of the ordinary, with Mr. Lewis's direct testimony being labeled PNM Exhibit 4 rather than PNM Exhibit 1. So just bringing that to your attention.
No, and I appreciate that. And that's what I was going to have suggested anyway that you do when I noticed that it looks like you forgot to upload that particular exhibit. I'm fine with that. I don't have any concerns. Mr. Rossi, while we're on the subject, I'm assuming you were able to get that exhibit. You have all Pnm's exhibits, correct?
Yes, I do, and I have the printed version from a while ago as well.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, well, good morning, Mr. Chair.
Morning.
We are just about to go on the record. I'll give it another minute. Mr. Lee, are you ready to go on the record, sir?
I am, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I see that it's 9 o'clock. We will go ahead and go on the record, Mr. Lee.
When you're ready, Judge.
Thank you. Good morning. We're now on the record, and this matter before the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission will please come to order. This is the time and place set for the evidentiary hearing in the matter of Public Service Company of New Mexico's application for continuation of a plan to manage fuel and purchased power costs by entering into certain forward market transactions. The case has been docketed as case number 24-00238. My name is John Kreinkamp. I'm the hearing examiner with the PRC who has been assigned to preside over this case today. We are being transcribed by a court reporter this morning, and so for the sake of that record, what I'd like to do is start with entries of appearance from the parties, starting with PNM.
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Chris Atencio for PNM.
Good morning. And the PRC's utility division staff.
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Nicholas Rossi for PRC staff. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you both for being here today. I will note for the record that there were no individuals or entities who signed up for an oral public comment as provided by the procedural order. I will also note that e-docket does contain, I think, one written public comment under this docket number, filed in e-docket on or about August 22nd. I do suspect that that may have been erroneously attributed to this case, but that is an e-docket, just to flag that. We are also joined, I believe, at least for the start this morning, by Chair O'Connell. Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. Thank you for helping us with this hearing.
No problem. So last week I received PNM's proposed list of witness examination that was sent to the service list. We only have two witnesses this morning, one each from PNM and staff. I understand that each of PNM and staff have requested 15 minutes of cross-examination with the other party's witness. Given that we only have those two witnesses and should have plenty of time this morning, I'm not going to be particularly strict about time limits unless either party has concerns about that. So I'll treat those 15 minutes as more estimates than hard deadlines. With that, are there any preliminary matters that we need to address on the record before we start with the first witness this morning? Okay, seeing none. With that, PNM, you can call your first and I believe only witness.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. PNM calls for our, as you say, only witness, Mr. Shane Lewis.
Thank you. And Mr. Lee, if you would swear in the witness.
Mr. Lewis, if you'd raise your right hand, you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in a matter of opinion should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir, I do.
Thank you, sir.
Would you please state your name and job title?
Yes, sir. Shane Lewis, manager of Forward Power Trading.
Do you have before you what's been labeled as PNM Exhibit 1?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is this document?
I apologize. Let's see. Document 1 is my August 9th supplemental testimony.
Was this prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, sir, it was.
Is it a true and accurate account to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir, it was.
Do you have any additions or corrections to it?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do you have, let's move to what's labeled PNM Exhibit 2.
Yes, sir. PNM Exhibit 2 is the rebuttal testimony.
Was this prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, sir, it was.
Is it a true and accurate account to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any additions or corrections to it?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to move to PNM Exhibit 3. Do you have that one before you?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what is that document?
That is the September 24th supplemental testimony.
Was it prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, sir, it was.
Is it a true and accurate account to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any additions or corrections to it?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir, they would.
All right, and lastly, looking at PNM Exhibit 4, do you have that before you?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is that document?
And that is my prepared direct testimony.
Was it prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, sir, it was.
Is it a true and accurate account to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it was.
And do you have any additions or corrections to it?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Hearing Examiner, I would move admissions of PNM Exhibits 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Mr. Atencio. Mr. Rossi, any objection to the admission of PNM Exhibits 1 through 4?
No objection. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, PNM Exhibits 1 through 4 are hereby admitted into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. That's all the questions I have for Mr. Lewis, and I would offer him for questioning from either cross-examination or questioning from yourself or the commission.
Thank you. Mr. Rossi, you have any questions for the witness?
Yes, I do. Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Lewis. I'm Nicholas Rossi, attorney for the NMPRC staff. Thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Rossi.
Just have a few questions for you. So on page 1, lines 21 through 22 of your rebuttal testimony, you don't actually probably need to jump there. I'll walk you through where you were. You state that purchases for resource adequacy should be excluded. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. Right then, my dog decided to try to drain the water bowl. I'll go back. You state that purchases for resource adequacy should be excluded from the guideline limit calculations. Are you aware of any statute, commission rule, or commission order that defined purchases for resource adequacy?
I am not aware, no, sir.
So at this point, the commission, it sounds like that you're not aware of any sort of requirements there. So the commission could essentially define that however they chose. Do you agree with that?
I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
So Since you're not aware of an order or something like that that defined purchases for resource adequacy, do you believe the commission can define it how you're requesting or in any other means? Do they have the authority to do that?
I believe they do. Yes, sir.
Okay. Are these purchases for resource adequacy generally made more than 1 month in advance of delivery?
I guess up to this point, no, sir, they have not been. For maintaining and meeting these planning reserve requirements and the adequate margins, these have been transacted well in advance of the delivery month.
Okay, so many of the times they've been more like 6 months in advance. Is that correct?
If not beyond, yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What sort of time frame are you usually purchasing these resource adequacy purchases?
I would say, it's a strategic decision and, it's in support of multiple business units within the organization. So, we've worked with resource planning, our principal generation advisor, our risk management committee, and the decision has been made, for each year in which we've had a shortfall, how to transact, what levels to transact at, and how to best approach curing this deficiency, right? And I think that's changed year over year. For example, for 2023, the deficiency was quite large, right? Procuring 460 megawatts. So coming out of some summer seasons in which resource adequacy across the West was mildly concerning and questionable, the approach was to shore up and ensure that some of those short-term market purchases were made well in advance. And we did that on a dollar cost average basis, throughout the 2022 calendar year and even into 2023, that first quarter, I believe. Now, the shortfall for this calendar year was not as large, and the reserve margin that we were trying to procure these short-term market purchases to address, we made a determination that based off of summer conditions and improvements across the West, that we could potentially wait until forward prices decreased, as we got closer to the delivery months, and attempted to reduce the cost to the ratepayer.
When you say dollar cost average and then purchase it, can you explain what you mean there?
Sure, absolutely. Essentially taking the approach to levelize, the procurement over a time period, buying at different price points, right? Not necessarily trying to time, the forward prices, but trying to average the cost over time based off of a strategy to purchase at different periods.
Okay. So a similar definition to what it would be in, say, personal finance. Okay. Based on your understanding of the current commission's ongoing authorization in this case, do forward market transactions constitute resource capacity purchases, sales that are entered into at least a month before delivery?
I apologize. Can you repeat that? Make sure I
Do
understand.
forward market transactions constitute resource capacity purchases or sales that are entered into at least a month before delivery?
I apologize. To make sure I understand, so our resource adequacy purchases, do they fall under the purview of the plan? Is that the question?
Are they, well, first, are they entered into at least a month before?
Yes, sir.
So are there ever times when the resource adequacy purchases happen less than a month before?
To my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay. And then would these purchases or would these transactions be resource capacity, purchases, or sales. Would you agree with that? I think I've taken apart that question too much that it's no longer making any sense. I'm going to move on.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Is it fair to say that purchases for this resource adequacy are forward market transactions as defined in the context of this current case?
Yes, sir, they are.
Okay. So PNM currently has a proposal for carving out the purchases for these resource adequacy and or these planning reserves from the current guidelines from your limit guidelines governing the forward market transactions. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I believe as we were tasked to, make these short-term market purchases for these shortfalls of planning reserves, I believe our position had been, that these, are not traditional hedges. They are not entered into really under the primary objectives of the plan, but rather they fulfill a distinct need, right? And that is for capacity for planning reserves. Based off of that clear distinction, with really, no appropriate, or reasonable alternative, the thought process was that essentially, these were somewhat unique and distinct transactions. And then, additionally, these were also, discussed and reported in the applicable resource compliance reporting documents. So I believe, with the discussion and the understanding and documentation that these short-term purchases were going to be entered into, we did not, calculate guideline percentages as we executed these transactions.
Okay. In your opinion, is the public interest served by potentially reducing the regulatory involvement in these resource adequacy forward transactions? Is the public interest served by reducing the regulatory involvement?
I believe I would say no. I mean, I believe I am and P&M is supportive of continued discussions, and even additional frequency of meetings with PRC staff and involvement.
Okay. So if these the resource adequacy purchases are separated, do you then have a good feeling of how they'd then be reported if they're reported separately from the hedging ones?
I would say that, they would continue to be documented and reported separately. These, are, carved out within our book structure, and they are easily identifiable outside of other purchase transactions for, say, natural gas or for purchase power that is not for resource adequacy and planning reserves.
Okay. In your August 9th supplemental testimony, you have a chart on page 3, the hedging program, net opportunity, and the gain and loss. Do you know the history of why PNM proposed and implemented that methodology, the gain and loss?
I mean, I could opine on, my belief. Unfortunately, that precedes my time, for the original, hedging plan. But, my understanding and belief is that, the comparison is, essentially to show, what would happen alternatively if the hedging program did not exist and these open positions were taken to the day into the spot market. So if there was excess generation for an off-system sell, had that been held as an open position and carried into the day-ahead market, what would that comparatively look like? So, really it's to show, an applicable methodology and comparison based off of that alternative.
Has there, prior to your rebuttal testimony, been any other thoughts or Has there anyone ever advocated for changing that calculation?
I would say discussions through the continuation of the plan and discussions with staff. I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, there has not been. I can say internally, the forward trading team, we have, discussed some of the complexities and nuances of the methodology and how, over time that how it's applicable to changes in, these forward markets and, potential valuation methodology, it could potentially be looked at, as far as a different methodology that might be more applicable. For example, the methodology is fairly straightforward in the fact that it uses a normal day ahead indice for that 16-hour product. We have had instances where, we might transact on 13 through 20 hourly shaped product, and that valuation, is not necessarily reflective of the value of those hours. So definitely there have been discussions on how it could be improved or changed internally. But again, I don't think those discussions have been held outside of our department.
Okay. Can you think of any quick ways that or can you explain what it is you say in the rebuttal on how do you think we should try to fix that gain loss calculation?
That's a pretty big question. To be honest, that's the calculation and a methodology that, is understandably managed outside of, the trading and the forward trading team. So, any changes to the methodology and, what an applicable indice or even, a methodology that goes beyond the indices, I think that would probably require some resources internally, some other experts to probably opine on that as well. So I don't know if I have a direct answer for you right now. Apologies.
Okay. I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Mr. Chair, do you have any questions for Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Lewis. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
I just have a couple questions and trying to, I appreciate the answers you provided last week in response to bench request. It's very enlightening to see how the world has changed since 2008 and the first approval of this. So then I'm looking at P&M exhibit SL3. That was an exhibit that was attached to the testimony that you provided in support of the application for this case. And just wondering, big picture, can you walk through how has this exhibit changed as the market has changed since 2008?
Apologize if you don't mind. Let me see if I get to this. This was on my prepared direct testimony.
Yeah, it's the testimony that you supplied in support of the application. And then it's marked SL3, and it's just a one-pager that shows what the guidelines are for the hedging program.
Oh, yes, sir. I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so having read the responses to the bench request, and it talks about how 2008 was an era when there was a lot of baseload on the system, and then kind of there's a midterm period where it's more about natural gas, and then where we're at now versus where we're going to be in the period of this approval would be portfolio dominated more with solar and storage and that type of thing. So anyway, those remarkable changes over the time, wondering how the guidelines have changed over that time.
Absolutely. I would say that the guidelines themselves, have not changed, since the original instant plan. How we have had to work within those guidelines has changed, I think, to the point that you're making. I would say that prior to the retirement of San Juan and the changes to our Palo Verde generation, we were, net long in our position mostly. So mostly the guidelines allowed for us to, make off-system cells, with this excess link that we had, over certain periods, right? As far as, the ability to procure natural gas or make power purchases, our fixed price link, was pretty heavy then. And so, we really only have some small windows over the summer in which we might not be hitting those thresholds, and we could potentially look at purchasing some natural gas, right? As the retirements have occurred and, the Palo Verde generations has changed over time, our portfolio has changed quite a bit with, as you mentioned, the changes of additional renewables on the system and energy storage. Then you kind of bring in the complexities of carbon compliance, for the ETA, and the positions that we use have changed greatly, over the last couple of years. We don't have, for the most part, in some of these months, as much excess length as we had. Prior to these resource adequacy market purchases, I don't believe outside of the balance of the month, we had, made market purchases. Again, due to the guidelines, we didn't have the ability to do so. And so, now, trying to, identify how to, best cover these shortfalls that we have, over the, critical hours outside of the solar hours, with market purchases and, how to identify these percentages, it's become a lot more complex, I would say. And really, trying to figure out moving forward, based off of our, needs, based off of the ETA and carbon compliance and, the changes in the resources and the delays that we've had. We've really had fewer opportunities, to make off-system cells. And, we're really probably going to be looking more at, market purchases during certain seasons and periods. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also gets to my next question is both table 1, table 2 ends with a note about market conditions could produce need to increase the percentages used. In such circumstances, PNM will document the need and actions taken. So I see that as PNM reserving flexibility to go bigger than what the guidelines say. Do you believe PNM also, well, first of all, do you agree with that?
I do, yes, sir.
And then do the guidelines create a requirement that these forward transactions are executed at the level in the guidelines? Like, could you just not do any hedging within these guidelines?
Absolutely, yeah. The plan, I believe, and the guidelines, allow us and give us the framework for hedging, but there is no requirement for us to hedge. And as far as market conditions producing that need to increase the percentages used, I believe our understanding has always been that that would be documented. Definitely a documented event, but we make every attempt, and to my knowledge, I don't believe we have exceeded these guidelines. But we do make the attempt to follow these guidelines at risk of non-recovery, right? I think that's the last thing that we want.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then just kind of a follow on to that is, each step of the way that the goal is provide fixed price certainty. And then, like guideline table 1 is includes natural gas forward transactions. And then the testimony provided in bench request talks about mostly going to be about variable energy resources. So how do you achieve fixed price certainty if buy fuel far in advance and then you get there and you've either got more or less solar than you expected when you bought the fuel? So, how do you deal with a mismatch between fuel purchased and then energy that is needed?
Yeah, we always have the opportunity to close out the position, right? So, I mean, if we, had a situation in which we had procured the gas and let's say there was a, plant outage or we weren't able to actually utilize the gas for its intended purpose for the plant, we could always sell, into the market again. There might be some variance between, the forward contract price and the price that we sell, closer to the delivery month or even on the day. But we could always close that position. For the most part, the gas procurement that we've done in recent years has mostly been in the prompt month. So the next month out, June for July, say. And the reason being is that, we typically, over that calendar year, the 70% for the current calendar year, especially with the shoulder months, we might not have room within the guidelines to make those purchases. So we typically will wait for that prompt month in which we have, the 85%, and we might be able to buy, a certain amount of MMBTUs in order to stay within that guideline percentage.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, then the consequences would just be a financial result. Either what you bought it for is less than what you end up selling it for to close out the position or vice versa, but then you're still in balance with energy demand versus supply.
I agree with that. Yes, sir.
And then give you an opportunity to opine on a question that bench request asked of staff. It is, do you see volatility as bad?
I see volatility as bad. I see mitigating volatility as good. I think the concept of reconceptualizing volatility or, even further, trying to quantify, the assertion, of the plan and the plan objective. I would say, the one thing that I have some certainty is that I'm definitely not a subject matter expert in that area. I'm not a mathematician or a statistician either. So, trying to quantify that, I think would probably require internal resources that, have more expertise on that topic. I think, fundamentally, by having fixed price certainty, by closing positions in a portfolio, that again, fundamentally, that's going to reduce volatility, right? It'll reduce the volatility for fuel and purchase power costs, and it'll reduce volatility for any potential enhanced margin for off-system sales. So I believe that the concept fundamentally makes sense. Does it require, further exploration on reconceptualizing? I think that's something we'd be open to discussing with staff, but, based off of those responses and, that short time frame last week and between that and today's hearing, we really haven't had much time to deep dive into that.
Yeah, understood. And really where I'm coming from is trying to figure out a balance between volatility and price signal.
Which makes sense, yes.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're saying P&M's going to have excess generation to sell. Also would mean there might be opportunities for us to buy generation that's excess from other folks. So it might be more volatile, but at a lower price. So
sure,
how do you balance fixing the price versus the opportunity of taking advantage of a more volatile market? And then the other thing I'm thinking about, and maybe you can help me with this, is, and I heard what you just said, so okay, if the answer is I don't know, is how does this hedging program muck up price signals when you have storage on the system? Because you may have fixed the financial transaction and then you get a market position, and instead of buy or sell, it might be store or discharge is the better answer. And I'm just not seeing, obviously, how following these guidelines does or doesn't interfere with that.
Don't know if I have an answer on the spot. Apologies.
Appreciate that. Next one is just opportunity for you to teach me something. If you could go to your bench request response, page 6. I think I understand what's on line 17. To date, there have been large market premiums for non-CAISO products during summer months. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Yes, sir. Let me get there. Page 6, which line?
It's very tail end of line 16. It's mostly just line 17 where you're talking about these non-CAISO products. So what are they? What are they? Why do they exist? How is that going to change if P&M enters a day-ahead market?
Yeah, no, so good question. So, CAISO and, I guess, explicitly the MRTU market and, market exports, over the previous summers, CAISO, I think we observed, multiple instances, multiple days in which, market awards might not have either cleared the day ahead integrated forward market or the residual unit commitment. And they were not awarded in those market runs. And then even further, even rebid in the real-time market or even real-time exports out of CAISO, we saw those market adjusted by the market operator, right? And again, that's potentially capacity shortfalls or assumed capacity shortfalls, within California ISO, and they're reducing the exports. And that's a risk, right? Especially as you go into the trade day and have expectations that an export is going to occur either from, a bid within the California ISO on our behalf as the scheduling coordinator, or even as another marketer or entity that might be selling us, WSPP Schedule C firm power, which does not have any restrictions to be supplied out of CAISO, right? So, based off of those potential, extreme conditions in the California ISO, a lot of load serving entities and, buyers, looking to procure the energy, they have identified that there's a premium for non-CAISO energy. So, that is, a tradable product typically through the brokers or bilaterally, which essentially, says that, this is WSPP Schedule C firm, but I want to make sure that this is not sourced out of the California export. And that has held a pretty strong premium in certain months and across the season. We saw into September, for example, pretty strong premiums over the typical day-ahead indices, upwards of $60. And again, that is to ensure that the energy is not coming out of CAISO. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Just how I read it was, well, if it didn't clear CAISO, it's too expensive. So why is that called a premium?
No, so yeah, so you'll see marketers that at times might resupply. If California ISO is adjusting, market awards, but at times they will not resupply, and essentially that'll be damage settlements, right? And so really kind of what makes the WSPP Schedule C firm is really keeping one financially whole, right? So if
Financially, I'm sorry, keeping one financially
whole, yes, sir. So if really the main consideration is deliverability and reliability of deliverability, that's really why people at times are opting to make sure that this is not sourced from the CAISO export.
So just summarize what I'm hearing is people are charging a premium for not flowing through CAISO.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then again, do you have any ability to opine on if P&M or when P&M joins a day-ahead market, that might change. That might affect this dynamic, I guess, not change it.
As far as, changes, as far as, market selection and how, this would directly impact that, I don't think I have, an answer today on that. No, sir.
Yeah, that's fair. And then just the other curiosity question is, what about Western Resource Adequacy Program, the RAP?
Yeah, definitely not an expert on that. Definitely have other resources internally that, are more dedicated to that. But I believe there have been discussions that, for your forward showing and, to be able to show, that the capacity is firm. I believe there has been discussions that, it has to be, specified source, and it cannot be a generic contract, say WSPP Schedule C firm alone.
Right. So if the goal of RAP is to provide more confidence in deliverability, feels to me like that should reduce this premium you're talking about.
Potentially, I don't know if I know for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, just thinking out loud here. So, and then finally, just last question I had was again back to the testimony you filed in support of the application. Supplied P&M exhibit SL6, which is a graph of Henry Hub daily index prices. I was just curious to know how that relates to this application.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Henry Hub is really, to identify the price trends as they relate to, typically a NYMEX price, so gas futures. It's been a while since we've transacted or entered into, a basis swap, actually financially hedged gas. But, this is, reflective of, the central Henry Hub, prices, and the movements that we see, which, can be reflective of changes, depending on basis, which can change based off of the delivery location. NYMEX is a pretty good indicator of movements in, financial gas prices.
Yeah, that's where I was getting confused. Are you providing this exhibit to show that P&M is hedging by getting fixed prices at Henry Hub?
No, the exhibit is kind of in a chart that's been included in most of the continuances. I don't think there was really, any specific reason to include it, based off of our current hedging activity or, what we were trying to, set forth based off of this exhibit. It's really just a supplemental chart to show, how that gas, how the Henry Hub prices had moved over time.
And does P&M buy more gas at Henry Hub or at Permian?
Oh, Permian. The large majority of the physical gas that we buy is, within the San Juan Basin and the Permian Basin.
And have Permian pricing trends tracked Henry Hub?
It's been a while since I've checked, the correlation, between the basis and Henry Hub. The basis has been harshly negative, Permian. So while, Henry Hub over the time period has remained positive, Permian prices, as I'm sure you're aware, have been, deeply negative. And, even throughout the summer, I think we had, record 60+ days of negative pricing, within the Permian area.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing too, is that there is no relationship between Permian pricing and Henry Hub pricing. And just kind of afraid that this application was just recycling of the same thing that happens every 5 years. And so I was trying to understand why we're getting a Henry Hub exhibit. So anyway, I appreciate that answer. And then that's my list, Mr. Kreinkamp. I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you being here.
And thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Lewis.
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
I have a few questions for you to follow up on both some questions that the chair was asking and then some of Mr. Rossi's questions as well. Let me start with the just absolute basics. Looks like you've been with PNM since 2010. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Just over 14 years, I think a few days ago.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations. Has that whole time been with the Forward Trading Group?
No, sir. I started out in our market risk department as a market risk analyst. And then that was probably 3.5 years. And then I did move into our wholesale power marketing group, and I've held various roles within the department, including real-time trader, power pre-scheduler, forward trader, and then most recently here as manager of forward power trading.
Okay. So how long have you been working with the Forward Trading Group?
About 7 to 8 years, maybe.
Okay. Okay. So you were working with them the last time that the hedging plan was submitted for commission approval. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I believe so.
Okay. How many PNM employees are in the Forward Trading Group?
Let's see, including myself, is that directly under my supervision, or the ones that might be traders that actively engage in the forward plan, the hedging plan?
I guess since you are the manager of the group, just how many employees are under your or within the group that you manage?
Yes, sir. I believe I have 7 direct reports.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, I guess, just about really the purpose behind PNM's hedging plan. So the chair was asking you a little bit about volatility. I'm not going to ask you necessarily the questions are, to follow up on some of Dr. Zadalis's testimony about, conceptualizing volatility and measuring it or anything like that. But just at I guess, a conceptual level, the idea behind the hedging plan is that it's better for customers to pay a consistent price rather than go through potential swings in pricing. Is that correct?
For the most part, I believe so. I wouldn't say a consistent price, but again, levelized over time, known prices at certain levels of certainty, as opposed to leaving that all for the market, the day ahead market in real time.
Okay, so there's still going to be some risk, but some volatility, but you're managing that risk. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, before PNM had this hedging plan, I assume that all of its customers essentially were, or the customers that PNM serves, they were essentially subject to all of this price volatility. Is that fair?
That is my understanding. I believe the original, instant plan precedes my time, but that is my understanding. Yes, sir.
Okay. And this price volatility, I know that we struggle to, I guess, measure that at least in a consistent way. But would this price volatility before this plan existed, would customers feel that volatility in the bills that they would receive? I mean, was it measurable in terms of the actual bills that a customer would receive every month?
I believe conceptually, again, fundamentally, yes. Had that been quantified, I'm not sure. But even to date, we see, seasonal periods and major changes and swings in the market, in which, had we had the opportunity to hedge, I would assume those type of occurrences occurred prior to the hedging plan. So this really provides the framework, to, make those strategic decisions and levelize that volatility, again, within the purview of the forward trading team, based off of, the best way to manage the positions and the long-term positions that we have. That kind of makes sense.
Okay. I mean, I guess the question that I'm coming to, I'm trying to better understand, is there a really compelling need to protect customers from these potential rate spikes that would come from this volatility? Do you understand why I'm asking that, and I guess what my question is?
I believe I do, yes. On my behalf, I believe, yes, there is. Without the framework of a hedging plan, we, do not have the ability to, lock in and close specific positions, again, based off of, changes in prices. Again, this, allows us to have some certainty in our fuel cost, and the purchase power costs that we might have. And then it also, allows us to have certainty in some of the, enhancements to margin that we have to, the customer benefit as well as we, make these off-system sales and enter into these transactions. Without the ability to do so, again, there's definite potential for, major swings and changes and volatility, within the prices that would be paid had we held these positions, strictly, in the spot market. So yes, I do believe that, it does add additional customer value.
Okay. And the chair was asking you about the hedging guidelines that have been in place, I think, since the hedging plan was originally approved by the commission. And I know again that there's this question about how to measure volatility, but I mean, do you have some sense, are prices today as volatile as they were when you originally entered into the plan? Are they more volatile? I mean, is there any sense as far as, just the circumstances that led PNM to enter into this, to start this plan?
To be honest, I don't know if, I have, the data or the, information, based off of, those prior years and current trends and the volatility to, really provide a substantial, a good statement to that effect. I do know that, in recent years, we have seen, pretty strong volatility, based off of, summer resource delays, across the West, and strong price spikes, that we've observed, on some days, throughout that typically July through September period. And then we've also observed, based off of, major weather events, strong gas prices as well, in some of the winter months. But again, to try to quantify or do some, analysis on how those volatilities have changed, I don't believe myself or anyone on the forward trading team has done any analysis recently.
Okay. Now, this is related obviously to a question that was in a bench request. I think it was the second bench request. And I just wanted to ask you about one of the answers that you gave. If you turn to this is going to be PNM Exhibit 3. So it's the September 24th supplemental testimony, page 3. And I want to ask you about the sentence that starts on on line 14 on page 3 to line 18. Pursuant to the ETA and its carbon emission standard, PNM may need to potentially purchase off-peak energy in certain forward months due to baseload generation being retired. Can you explain that one to me? Why that would be the case?
Yeah, so with the changes that we have, to comply with the carbon compliance as it relates to the ETA, we know that we're going to have to make some substantial changes to our thermal resource dispatch and commitment, and we're already seeing that today as we attempt to manage the compliance prior to the final order, and as we look at the final order now. And part of that is resources that we might have kept on, around the clock, or even Four Corners dispatch, those are going to be, potentially reduced, over those off-peak hours. We'll be, cycling some of the natural gas resources, and, trying to essentially, save, carbon, especially seasonally throughout the year as we try to manage the compliance of this requirement. So, based off of the changes in our dispatch, even to date, we've seen a shortfall in our, resources to meet load over the off-peak hours. So, on a day-ahead basis and a real-time basis, we've been buying, a decent amount of energy to balance, over the off-peak hours in order to keep these resources offline. And so, as we continue to move forward with compliance, I think the expectation is that we anticipate to continue to, have to be a net buyer in order to comply, especially over these off-peak hours. You could probably assume with our, strong solar position, prior to the solar ramp hours, and, depending on the variability in the wind, we have very limited base load generation, over those off-peak hours prior to, the solar hours, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And the prior sentence talks about those solar hours. And am I right to thinking that during those solar hours of the day, that problem essentially is reversed? At that point, you have too much production?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So now let me ask you about, there's been discussion with both Mr. Rossi, and I believe the chair's questions touched on this too. Let me ask you about this summer resource adequacy issue and this distinction between that and then the amount of energy that you need to meet jurisdictional loads. So I guess my first question, how long has PNM been utilizing the hedging plan to make these forward purchases for summer resource adequacy? Is that a recent phenomenon, or has PNM been doing that for a while now?
It's a recent phenomenon. I believe 2022, we entered into transactions for summer resource adequacy for the summer of 2022. I believe that was the first summer. And so this was a new phenomenon and even new to the trading group as well.
Okay. All right. And I'm trying to understand conceptually again. I read, the answer that you provided in your supplemental testimony. You are proposing that these purchases for summer resource adequacy be excluded from the calculation of the guideline percentages. Can you explain that to me? I guess starting with essentially what the differences are between these types of purchases and then the other purchases that you would make under the hedging plan?
Sure. Again, I believe, the distinction is, the deficiency that they are, entered into to address, which is, planning reserves and, resource adequacy. So I think that is the distinction, under the plan. I believe that, it could be assumed that, the hedge transactions that we enter into the traditional hedges, that there is an alternative, right? And that alternative is to, take that position into these, other markets, into the spot market. As far as planning reserves are concerned, prudently, those are entered into, within, an advance period, at a future date, to ensure that we have the, planning reserve margins that we need, for that season. So I think that's really one of the main distinction between them and traditional hedges. Where it becomes somewhat complex and difficult for us to kind of quantify based off of these hedge percentages is, I think I might have mentioned in one of my supplemental responses that, we're, curing a deficiency that's a coincidental peak on, a load and resources table, for what could potentially be a single hour, over a single summer period. And we are, trying to, make these short-term market purchases to address that shortfall, over the summer season. Based off of the solar hours and the link that we have, for the standard on peak and maybe even across the all hours of the day for the calendar year, we might already be near, if not over, on our guideline percentages. And since, by definition, essentially the, reserve margins are in excess of the system peak demand, it just does not seem like an adequate way for us to calculate percentages by, bringing resource advocacy purchases, reserve margins into this calculation. So I believe, based off of, those concerns, one of the easier approaches is to, continue to report these transactions separately, but not necessarily attempt to calculate if there has been an exceedance of these guidelines based off of the purchases. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does, but I'm not sure that so if you look at, this is your rebuttal testimony, which is Exhibit 2. If you look at page 2 of your rebuttal testimony, you talk about that the calculation of the net opportunity gain and loss is not adequate or meaningful. And I'm still not sure that I understand why it is that the intent behind these purchases would affect the meaning or the adequacy of that metric. Can you help me understand that?
Oh, sure. In relation to the comparison. Gotcha.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, my understanding has been, and, I think it might be safe to assume that, the comparison, what it attempts to do is give you, what would happen if alternatively the hedges that were entered into were held, not entered into, and you were to do these same type of transactions, on the day, essentially in the spot market, within the day ahead, and the real-time market. So I believe that statement, mostly addresses that. This is, attempting to, first, do a comparison of an alternative, which, taking, planning reserve requirements and resource adequacy, to, the spot market, especially, in an amount that's, 460 megawatts, is not prudent. So it's really not, a strong alternative. And, based off of the price that is paid for physical delivery with, numerous attributes, a day ahead indice for, what we would say is, a vanilla WSPP Schedule C ICE product, is not a fair comparison. So, that's really the key distinction for these is, we're entering into these well in advance, typically with multiple attributes like, source specified, maybe firm, transmission delivery, with additional attributes that, might have an inherent premium over, a typical indice. So, the actual comparison based off of the traditional hedges really isn't a fair or accurate comparison. And really, I think, the concern is we don't want anyone to presume that, these were entered into unreasonably and that, there's an extreme, opportunity loss that, really isn't, fair representation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the other subjects that I had asked you about in that second bench request was the opportunity cost of 95 million, just over 95 million, I believe, in calendar year 2023. If I understood your testimony correctly, that too was due to this summer resource adequacy, the purchases for that.
Yes, sir. The majority of that, yes, was attributed to the summer resource adequacy purchases.
Is that I mean, would you expect that same type of opportunity cost to occur in the future? Is that going to happen? Would you anticipate that to happen again?
If the methodology remains the same and we are requested to do the same comparison, within this continuation, I would assume that yes, there would still be, a noticeable and substantial variance between the daily indices and the market purchases and the contract price paid.
Okay. All right. So then let me ask you about some other items. One item in your direct testimony was just so that I understand the types of instruments used in trading here. If you look at page 10 of your direct testimony, you talked about how a forward contract can terminate with either a financial settlement or a physical delivery of the commodity. Can you explain under the circumstances under which you would terminate a forward contract through a financial settlement? Does that question make sense?
I believe so. If you don't mind, what line item was that again?
Well, the specific line item is on page 10, line 1. I mean, it's a carryover from obviously the previous page.
Yeah, I believe, that is, to look at the sentence in whole, unless the parties agree to terminate the contract early, typically, a forward contract is going to settle with, that physical delivery if it's a, physical commodity. The financial one, I believe, typically like a futures contract, that's going to settle financially, based off of the instrument. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I understand it in concept. I was just trying to understand maybe if you could give me an example of the circumstances under which that might happen or why it might happen.
Yeah, and it might be, the wording within the sentence as well, and terminate might be, the contract end. So I don't know if it, necessarily means terminating, prior to delivery or prior to, the terms of the agreement being met.
Okay. All right. And then I think my last question for you, if you look at this, I guess is P&M exhibit SL4 of your direct testimony. And this is going to be, yes, it's SL4. This is on page 8 of 9. You have a table here showing cumulative financial hedges and then cumulative revenues. If you see, are you on that page? I'm looking at lines 31 to 32.
Apologies, I'm struggling to get there. You said
No,
paid.
you're fine. Yeah, so it's your direct testimony. So exhibit 4. It's table or it's exhibit SL4 to your direct testimony, lines 31 and 32.
And this is the fuel and purchase power cost adjustment clause report. Is that the one?
Yes, I believe so, yes. Your direct testimony on page 29 describes this as a summary of the total cost and revenues associated with the hedging program since it began in May of 2010. And so I just wanted you to tell me what that number was on line 31, column D.
Okay, on page 8 of 9, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm finally there. Apologies.
No, you're fine. The number is 3,654,000. I believe you see that.
Yeah, I believe that, based off of the footnote, and apologies, I don't prepare this, and it's been a while since I've looked at this specific page, but, I believe this is the cumulative gain and loss, since May of 2010.
So if I'm reading it right, then does that mean that there's been a cumulative financial gain?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I thought that I had read in your testimony at one point, and I think also in Dr. Zadalis's testimony, that you can expect with a hedging program small losses over time. But here it looks like there's a financial gain. Again, am I reading this correctly?
Might be something I would, prefer to take back to the team that prepares. But if I'm reading it right, I think this is just financial hedges. So I don't believe that would include the physical, hedges that have been entered into, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, I don't believe I have any further questions for you, but I appreciate your time this morning. Mr. Chair, do you have any follow-up questions based on anything I asked?
No, appreciate the opportunity, but no further questions.
Okay. PNM, any questions on redirect?
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Just one second here.
No problem.
I think I just have one quick question, if that's all right.
Please proceed.
Mr. Lewis, you had mentioned earlier in one of your responses to, forgive me, I don't recall who asked it, but one of the other questions, you mentioned major swings in volatility. Could you describe a little bit more what those would look like?
Let me think. Maybe to start off, to my understanding, I'm not aware of anyone on the forward trading team or, anybody, in any other business units really, quantifying, the volatility and the changes in prices. We, have, subscribed to and obtained, implied volatilities and historical volatilities, for option valuation or for other modeling needs. But as far as quantifying and tracking those volatilities and the changes, I don't think that is currently done. But again, fundamentally and intuitively, the volatility in prices are going to be, large, swings, instantaneous swings in prices, over time. And, we have seen, over the last, at least 3 to 4 years since the last continuation, larger price movements, within the day ahead market and even the real-time market. Typically these prices can, approach the price cap floor, the soft cap, and we can even see at times CAISO prices exceeding those soft cap price limits as well, as far as power prices are concerned. And then, from a gas perspective, we've seen large movements in, gas prices across the Permian, from day-to-day change and, over a specific trading month, we can see those, be slightly positive and then, go, partially negative, as far as -$6, -$7, on a trade day. And inversely, during some of the, larger winter events that we've seen on gas, we've seen those prices, go up substantially as well, based off of market conditions. So again, I don't really have, anything prepared, as far as, observations of those trends and the volatility associated with the prices. But definitely something we could provide if requested.
Good. Thank you. And I don't have any other questions, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Thank you. Mr. Rossi, any questions on recross?
I do have a little bit of recross. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
You were talking with hearing examiner Korean Camp about when PNM started the resource adequacy purchases. I think you may have accidentally misspoke, and I just want to clarify the record to try to make sure we get the right year there. If I look at your August 9th supplemental testimony, which I guess is PNM Exhibit 1, and you have that chart on page 3 of that, which includes the gain loss that we were talking about earlier. In 2020, it has hyphens all the way through, so I guess the hedging program wasn't used in that year. Then 2021, there's a negative 6.6 million. Do you see that line? Or are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. When I review Dr. Zadalis's testimony, so staff exhibit 1 on page 19, he talks a little bit about where that 6.575 million opportunity loss came from. And would you agree it was part of it was from the unexpected loss of system capacity due to the failure of the cooling tower structure at San Juan generating station?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. And so then the resource adequacy program was used to make up that shortfall. Is that correct?
I would kind of, distinctly say that those were balance of the month positions taken, due to an unexpected forced outage. These were not entered into based off of a known shortfall of capacity due to resource delays or other needs. Again, it was, I would say operationally something that occurred within the month. And, we made the decision within the month to procure energy based off of the shortfall. So these weren't, necessarily entered into in the same means and under, the support of, say resource planning and others to, manage a shortfall for resource adequacy. Again, it was more of an operational consideration. Does that kind of make sense?
I guess it does. Well, then I'll just re-ask that question of when were resource adequacy purchases started? So it sounds like you would exclude 2021 for that reason?
Personally, I would. Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. PNM, anything else?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, thank you. Well, unless the chair has any remaining questions for you, I believe that concludes. Mr. Chair, do you have any remaining questions?
Questions, and then also want to thank everybody who's participating in this hearing. I'm going to have to hop off, and in Mr. Camp and Mr. Lee, I trust. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Lewis. We appreciate your testimony. I believe that you can be excused.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. PNM, anything else at this stage?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Thank you. Mr. Rossi, you can go ahead and call your first and again only witness.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Staff will call Dr. Bryce Zadalis.
Good morning, Mr. Zadalis. Mr. Lee, if you would please swear in the witness.
Dr. Zadalis, would you please raise your right hand? You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the matter not pending should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rossi?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Dr. Zadalis. This always sounds like a silly question, but can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Bryce Zadalis.
And how are you employed?
I am a consultant with the New Mexico Public Regulations Commission, working for the utility division there.
And were you also previously a full-time employee with PRC staff?
Yes, I was. I started my tenure there in January of 2022.
Okay. As part of your duties, did you review this application?
I did, yes.
And did you prepare testimony for this proceeding?
Yes, I prepared direct testimony as well as supplemental testimony.
Okay. Do you have a copy of Staff Exhibit 1?
Yes, I do. That would be my direct.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry for speaking over you. That would be my direct testimony dated the 6th of September, 2024.
And was this testimony prepared by you?
Yes, it was.
Is this exhibit your sworn testimony in this matter?
It is, yes.
Are there any attachments?
There are a few exhibits. I believe, yes, I have an appendix as well as some exhibits, yes.
And Appendix A, what is that?
I believe that is the list of cases that have either advised or provided testimony adopted by other staff members, or else testimony that I've supplied for cases from myself, written by myself.
And then BZ1, what is that exhibit? Or
I believe I don't have it directly in front of me right now, but I believe that those are the discovery requests that staff, the responses to the discovery requests that staff received from PNM.
And is the affirmation from PNM also included?
Yes, I believe so.
Is some of that redacted?
It is, yes.
Why is that?
Those were discovery responses that staff did not use in its testimony.
Okay. And what is BZ2?
That would be my supplemental testimony dated the 24th of September, 2024.
BZ2 is still an attachment within your direct testimony.
Oh, okay. I do not actually have that right immediately before me. I apologize for that.
Did you also include a attachment from?
Oh, yes,
page.
I see it now. Yes, I see it now. That's a publication from Platts pertaining to some forward market prices.
Okay. If I asked you the same questions in your testimony today, would your answers be the same?
They would be, yes.
Are your answers true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
They are, yes.
Staff will move to admit the direct testimony of Dr. Bryce Zadalis, Staff Exhibit 1.
Mr. Atencio, any objection?
No objection.
Thank you. With that, Staff's Exhibit 1 is admitted into the record.
Did you also, thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner, did you also prepare Staff Exhibit 2, your supplemental testimony?
I did prepare a supplemental testimony in this case, yes.
Is this your sworn testimony in this matter?
It is, yes, in response to bench requests.
Okay. If I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
They would be, yes.
And are the answers true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
They are, yes.
At this time, staff will move to admit Staff Exhibit 2, the supplemental testimony of Dr. Bryce Zadalis.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Mr. Atencio, any objection?
No objection.
Thank you. With that, Staff's Exhibit 2 is admitted into the record.
I have no further questions for this witness. He is available for cross-examination and further questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Atencio, do you have any questions for Dr. Zadalis?
I do not, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Dr. Zadalis. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Let me start with you, sort of where I left off with the previous witness. I'm assuming that you have reviewed the direct testimony of Mr. Lewis. Do you have his direct testimony available to you?
I can load it up. Yes, sir. I can do that right now.
Yeah, I would like to ask you about his direct testimony and one of the exhibits, and in
Yes.
particular, it's Exhibit SL4 to his direct testimony.
Yes, Your Honor, is that the Fppc filing? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yes. And I want to
Okay.
ask you about page 8 of 9. There's a table there.
I am there now. Thank you.
Okay. Can you explain to me what information is contained on pages, or on lines 31 and 32 of this table?
Yes, so line 31 of this table reads cumulative financial hedges gain loss of the current month. And then it has a footnote to 1, which references cumulative balance since May of 2010. And then line 32 is cumulative revenues and costs of physical sales and purchases as of the current month for the exact same time period dated back to May of 2010.
Okay.
And what you see in there is that for the financial hedges, P&M is reporting a roughly a $3.6 million opportunity or gain from its financial hedging activity since May of 2010. And then I presume I'm reading this correctly, but with respect to line 32 and the cumulative revenues cost of physical sales, it shows a cost of $295 million since May of 2010.
Right.
And then there's also the physical or the sale physical flow, which P&M values there at 60 million.
Okay.
So
All right.
Um,
No, I don't want to cut you off. Were you going to say something else?
I'm sorry, Johan, and I was curious if you'd like my perspective on this, if that's what ultimately the question is getting at.
Well, I'm still trying to understand exactly what the information means. There was a reference in the direct testimony that it was a summary of the total cost and revenues associated with the hedging program since it began.
Yes.
So am I understanding that essentially in order to get the cumulative cost of all of the hedging program, you would essentially take those the three figures, the 3.6 million, the negative 295 million, and the positive 60 million, you would add those up together and that would be the cumulative total? Is that how you interpret this?
I would assume so. That's what I would gather from looking at this, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the information I was trying to understand. So let me ask you, you heard you were on the call. You heard the questions that were being asked to Mr. Lewis. And I think one of the questions that I have, and I suspect that one of the questions that the commission has, essentially is trying to get at why exactly are we hedging? Why would PNM want to do this? Why is this important that PNM do this? And one of the questions that I asked Mr. Lewis was essentially, is there a real need to protect ratepayers from these price spikes, which I'm interpreting as one of the major reasons behind this program. I'd like to ask you to answer that question if you would.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important. I did listen to the conversation that you had with the previous witness, and from my perspective, what I testified to in my testimony, especially concerning the resource adequacy purchases that were made beginning in 2022, is that the P&M was in a position in which they were short about 460 megawatts of capacity. And they came before the commission, were transparent with the commission about their lack of resource adequacy for 2022 as well as 2023, especially 2023. And P&M thought that it was prudent to go ahead and to enter into some transactions pursuant to the plan, the instant plan here that we're discussing, in order to procure the resources necessary to meet its load and to maintain its specified reserve margin or loss of load expectation of 0.1. So my perspective there is P&M was in a position in which they could either, let this large, substantial shortfall roll over to the day ahead market or even the real-time market and make purchases in those near-time markets. Or else they could procure the capacity, the energy, multiple months in advance in order to actually firmly be certain that they're going to have adequate resources to meet their load during the peaks of summer 2023. I for one would think that it would be an unreasonable position to put P&M into if they had to procure in the near-term markets all of the missing capacity. That would be something I think the commission would, and I think going back to the commission statements from its open meetings in 2022, they were very concerned about, and they articulated that, getting the resource adequacy situation, the resource shortfall situation under control was something essential for PNM to do. So from the perspective of ratepayers, I think Shane had alluded to this before, or else testified directly to it. It's that, PNM can do one of two things. They can roll the shortfall over to the nearer term markets and hope that there's actually sufficient energy or capacity in those short-term markets to allow it to meet its load, or they can give their customers the certainty, as well as their own, internal integrated resource planning individuals, generation transmission individuals, the certainty that they will actually be able to meet that load multiple months in advance. Does that answer your question, Your Honor?
That does. That's very helpful. And that makes sense. And I think that's consistent with what Mr. Lewis was testifying to. So then let me ask you, just in terms of the function of the program, in your direct testimony, you explained that with one of these hedging plans, you would expect a net opportunity loss outcome, and that essentially this is a program that comes with a cost. Can you sort of elaborate on, why that would be the case, at least from a conceptual standpoint?
I can do that. I will start off by saying, I think from a financial perspective, there's probably multiple different ways that one can conceive of hedging. One way is to say that you take a position and you enter into an offsetting position. So in that case, unless you're paying for the offsetting position, you would expect basically the plan to cost nothing. However, PNM, what they're doing, in my estimation, is it's more akin to insurance. So they, at least with respect to this iteration of the plan from 2020 until 2024, wherein they're making these sorts of forward purchases, in order to actually guarantee that they have the certainty of having resources on their system. Like insurance, you're going to pay a little bit of a premium, and that's to be expected. So with respect to the current functioning of the hedging plan, of the forward market transaction authorization, I do think it is akin to insurance, wherein PNM is having to pay a little bit in order to make these transactions.
Okay. And again, you would have heard, because you were on the call, you heard some of the questions that the chair was asking Mr. Lewis just about essentially the changing circumstances of the program. I think I had asked him that question as well. And then essentially about the guidelines, and that the guidelines essentially haven't changed. Is that a point of concern at all, that although the circumstances surrounding PNM's use of the hedging plan have changed, that the guidelines have remained the same? Should the commission be concerned about that at all?
I think there are a few ways of looking at this. One way of looking at it, Your Honor, is to say that, yes, indeed, how PNM is actually generating its electricity now, or procuring its electricity, is vastly different from what it was back in 2009. And, perhaps it would be advantageous to update the guidelines, but whether or not there is an actual need based on what PNM, the sorts of activities that they're engaged in, I don't necessarily think that it is necessarily needed. I think for the reason that, similar to what Shane was explaining before, and staff is sympathetic to this, if there is an actual need to procure capacity to meet a shortfall, you can either take that into the day ahead, into the nearer term markets, or procure that on a forward basis, and at least have the certainty that those resources are going to be on your system to meet the load. And that is what PNM has done with respect to these resource adequacy transactions. I will say that from the standpoint of the guidelines, if there is to be any sort of carve out for resource adequacy transactions, i.e. if we are going to update, if the commission deems it necessary to update the guidelines, that very precisely defining the transactions that will be accepted from the guidelines, I think that would be a necessity, so that from our perspective, and I don't think necessarily P&M would do this. I'm sure their internal controls would be more than sufficient to ensure that you're not having other non-resource adequacy transactions actually being put into the bucket of resource adequacy transactions. So if there is an update to the guidelines, then if there is a need to update the guidelines, I think really starting with a very good, clear definition of resource adequacy transactions, those that would be accepted from the guidelines, that would be necessary.
And I'm going to ask you about the summer resource adequacy and that that issue. But just with respect to the guidelines, what I'm interpreting you as saying is that although the circumstances behind Pnm's hedging plan have changed dramatically since it was originally created, it's not necessarily clear at this time that there is a pressing need to amend those guidelines themselves. Is that fair?
So I think that is fair with respect to the guidelines that have been in place since I guess around 2009. The activities that P&M would normally that would normally reference the guidelines. So your purchases of natural gas, maybe your short-term purchases of electricity, selling electricity, as Witness Lewis stated before, those have not necessarily been taking place more recently. Really, the main purpose of this plan within the last couple of years has been to forward procure physical electricity.
Okay.
So
All
I
right,
don't
so
know
now-
if they're, I'm sorry.
No, please continue.
I was going to say, so to the resource adequacy, if the purpose of the plan, or else its use right now, is not necessarily the same as what it was 15 years ago, updating the guidelines at this juncture for things, such as gas purchases that might not necessarily be transacted right now. I don't know if that would just be the Commission and PRC and P&M spinning its wheels, or if updating the guidelines to reflect differentiation between resource adequacy purchases, maybe that would be the avenue to go down if there were any sort of alterations to the guidelines.
Okay. So now let me ask you about the summer resource adequacy issue and that sort of distinction. My first question to you is very similar to the question that I asked Mr. Lewis, just in terms of trying to understand why there would be this distinction between these purchases that are made for the purposes of summer resource adequacy versus essentially the other purchases that would be made under the hedging plan. Is there a reason to distinguish between those two types of purchases?
So again, I guess Your Honor, it would be contingent upon the venue in which or the medium in which the differentiation is actually being made. For instance, in my testimony, I did point out in my concluding statements that P&M could account for their summer resource adequacy proposals separately from their overall jurisdictional purchases and sales. So in that respect, yes, I think it would be fine to actually look at those separate from any other of the more typical hedging transactions that P&M would enter into. I think that would be advantageous. I think, again, it is up to the Commission as to whether or not they want to pursue any sort of new updates to the guidelines and, to any sort of differentiation between the regular forward, just your typical forward market transactions, and then these resource adequacy transactions specifically. Could there be some benefit to that? As I pointed out in my testimony, I think in terms of accounting for those separate from the other purchases, that would be advantageous, especially from staff's perspective when it has to review this particular authorization. It makes for, I think, an easier review. Just because these are necessarily transactions that, even though they are all forward market transactions, they're done for the specific purpose of ensuring that P&M is satisfying its reserve margins, its LOLEs. I don't, perhaps, Mr. Lewis and subsequent bench requests could expand on this, but I don't believe that he's necessarily the one who is initiating any sort of the summer resource adequacy purchases. I think it's probably their IRP team, P&M's IRP team, as well as their generation and transmission team, identifying the fact that there's a shortfall, then going over to the wholesale power marketing group and saying, this is what we need. And throughout that entire process, PNM, at least to date, and I expect going forward, they will have been in communication with commission and commission staff about the resource adequacy shortfall. I know I sort of went on a bit of a tangent there, Your Honor. I apologize for that.
No, it transitions, I think, relatively well to my next question. So, I think you've explained, that there's a concern about potential shortfalls and the need to essentially secure enough resource adequacy, to meet their load. My question, I guess, is given that that's the purpose of what they're doing, is there a benefit to that opportunity cost analysis that they do that they report on for the remainder of the transactions under the plan?
So I think it is advantageous that they continue to report their more typical traditional hedging activities, as has been established for the last 15 years with their opportunity loss, opportunity gain calculation. I think with respect to the forward physical procurement for summer resource adequacy purposes, as I pointed out in my supplemental testimony, I think moving to a more relevant proxy comparison would be better. So rather than, for instance, calculating what the opportunity cost or gain is from the day-ahead index price, you instead look at the transactions that they're making. So the forward market, the resource, we'll just call them resource adequacy purchases right now, that they're making, and you try to assess those against what the relevant market proxies are. So what would be, for instance, the market price for procured power? So you could look at forward curves, for instance, as that exhibit that I did not have before me earlier contained. Just at least comparing what PNM is paying to what the market prices are without necessarily going into calculating an opportunity gain or loss. I think that would be useful to staff, at least to vet from the standpoint of vetting these transactions for reasonableness, to ascertain, whether or not PNM is either paying close to what the market prices are, or does PNM have a reasonable as well as complete explanation for why there is a difference between what they're paying to procure power on a forward basis versus what the market prices are. So I think transitioning away for these transactions, for these summer resource adequacy transactions, away from the opportunity gain loss as based on an index price to more of just a side-by-side comparison with what, for instance, the forward curves would be saying with respect to market prices. I think that would be better. That would just be a much more relevant proxy price comparison for these sorts of long-term forward power purchase agreements.
Okay. Let me ask you about one of your recommendations. One of your recommendations, in your direct testimony, this is page 26 of your direct testimony. If you look at your recommendation number 2, for a new protective order within the docket to allow appropriate staff access to this confidential Exhibit D, as well as the request to review at any time executed forward market transaction terms and conditions. So this particular program comes up for review every 5 years. You're recommending, I think, that it be every 4 years. Given that, essentially, what would be the purpose of this new protective order and this new ability of staff to essentially request this information at any time? Essentially, what would the benefit to staff be, or the benefit to ratepayers or the commission? I should say it that way.
Yes. So I did draft this, I think, before you issued the protective order within this case. My question still would remain as to whether or not that protective order would cover anything subsequent to this hearing. If it does, then that's fine. If it requires a new protective order, then I guess that's what I was alluding to here. But I think it is incumbent upon staff to, review as well as be in touch with PNM as they're making these sorts of, large forward purchases for resource adequacy purposes moving forward. 460 megawatts of electricity capacity is a substantial amount. And I think at least allowing staff the ability throughout the course of the year to get information from PNM to actually look at the executed contracts, not necessarily to pass a judgment as to whether or not they're reasonable or make a recommendation relating thereto, but from an informational perspective, I think it would behoove staff to actually be kept in the loop much more than either a yearly process of review or potentially a multi-year process such as we have in this current docket. So I'm only looking at, for instance, through discovery requests, what their executed contracts are whenever this plan is up for renewal. I think it would be better from staff's perspective to actually have access to that information as those transactions are being made. And it just provides for more regulatory visibility, which as a public interest regulator, you would assume that does translate to a benefit to the public.
Let me ask you about the opportunity loss in 2023. This is the one that was 95 million. I think, as you noted in your direct testimony, that up until that point, really, I guess up until 2020, the yearly net transaction opportunity losses never exceeded 700,000, and then obviously since then has gone dramatically up. And then I think I understood Mr. Lewis to indicate that $95 million opportunity loss again was this issue of summer, resource adequacy, and you've testified to that as well. I had asked Mr. Lewis if he would expect that type of situation to recur in the future, and I understood him to say that yes, that is possible with, again, respect to this summer resource adequacy issue. You testified in your direct testimony that staff did not find that loss to be unreasonable. And so my question to you is essentially, if this is a situation that could recur in the future, is that something that the commission should be concerned about in terms of the possible opportunity loss?
So again, that's going to be contingent upon how we're calculating opportunity loss moving forward. I don't think that opportunity loss alone is necessarily indicative of the reasonableness of a transaction, as my testimony went on to explain. Again, as Mr. Lewis pointed out earlier, it is really contingent upon how you are calculating the opportunity loss, what the referent is. In this case, it is the ICE average index prices. But I think Mr. Lewis alluded to too, from a purely from a textbook economic standpoint, if somebody was to define opportunity gain or opportunity loss, or more generally an opportunity cost, you would have to have two interchangeable things. So I have an apple and a banana in my kitchen. If I decided to eat an apple and I wasn't able to access the banana or eat the banana, then the opportunity loss in that case would be eating the banana. However, if I wanted something like a military grade tank in lieu of an apple, I'm not going to be able to access that. And I think that's sort of the situation that we have here. It's a question of whether or not the forward contract that PNM enters into is genuinely exchangeable with the index price that the methodology of comparison for this plan has established. And I have my doubts as to whether or not that index price can actually be delivered, and whether or not if it would even be reasonable or prudent for PNM to have to try to procure a substantial amount of electricity in those markets when they had an alternative being the forward markets. So I think that's really a question of how are we going to define opportunity cost moving forward? And is that even like relevant to this particular situation? I don't think that an opportunity, just to reiterate, I do not think an opportunity cost assessment alone is sufficient to ascertain reasonableness. I would expect, as Mr. Lewis pointed out too, given the fact that PNM is transitioning to cleaner sources of electricity, as well as putting on substantial capacity of batteries. And those projects historically have gotten or have come into some delays. That is a reasonable possibility moving forward. And so you could have additional summer resource adequacy purchases that just have to be made in order for the system to meet its load and to maintain a commission approved or commission implicitly approved reserve margin or LOLE. So I think my issue here is really, as to whether or not the opportunity, what is the index there for that we're using to assess opportunity cost is actually a relevant, germane metric for these particular purchases. I think, if you want to keep the status quo, that's what's gone on for the last 15 years, but specifically for the longer term power purchase agreements, I think in terms of ascertaining reasonableness, what you'd want to look at are more relevant market proxy prices, as opposed to just a more theoretical, conceptual, non-real world opportunity loss, opportunity gain is based off an index price that may or may not truly be deliverable.
Mm-hmm. So there would be a need to define exactly what that opportunity cost was, but there's also a need to define what exactly these summer resource adequacy transactions, how you would define that category. Am I understanding that as two related questions?
I would agree with that conceptually, yes.
Okay. And I believe that's all the questions I have for you, Dr. Zadalis. I don't see anything else. Thank you very much for your time. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Rossi, any questions on redirect?
Yes, a brief question on redirect within the same discussion we were just or you were just having. That negative $95 million that we keep talking about, that's comparing the price of the actual purchase, which was done in, say, December, January for summer delivery, correct? But and then
yes,
currently it's comparing that to the day ahead market price.
Yes, so PNM would have begun transacting for resource adequacy purchases, which were known to the commission beginning in, I think it was the summer of 2022 for delivery during the summer of 2023, so around a year out. And those transactions continued, as Mr. Lewis indicated, throughout 2022 and into 2023. And ultimately...
Please continue.
Yes, and in this case, the exhibit that the opportunity loss gain chart is, or table is contained in, that is trying to compare the price of those purchases that were made over the course of a year to what the day ahead price was in a particular month.
And you're proposing, rather than have those two different comparisons, but to compare the price that it was actually purchased for with the index of the market at the time when the transaction happened.
Yes, for similar instruments. So not in the day ahead market, but if you're going to compare, and there's no perfect comparison, I will say that. However, if you are going to compare a forward purchase power agreement that's made, let's say, in October of 2024 for June 2025 delivery, I'd want to know what the relevant forward price curve, so that would be, at least a ballpark proxy price, market price, what those prices would be in October, in the month in which I am transacting the agreement, based on, well, not based on, but what the market is actually saying that delivery price would be in June of 2025 at the time I make the transaction in October of 2024. I think that would be a more accurate assessment of the reasonableness of the transaction, presuming that the transaction in the first place was necessary.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Mr. Atencio, do you have any questions? I know you didn't have any questions on direct or on cross, but do you have anything based on my questions or Mr. Rossi's?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, Dr. Zadalis, that's I believe that concludes your testimony today. I appreciate you making the time. It's been very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lee, I apologize. I did not give you a take a morning break. Are you okay to proceed? I think we're just about to wrap up here. But if
Yes,
you need a
Your
break-
Honor.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, Mr. Rossi, do you have anything else at this juncture from staff?
No, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, I believe we've gotten through all of the exhibits and witness testimony from both P&M and staff. So with that, that portion of the hearing is concluded today. Before we wrap up, I do want to address briefing, starting with the subjects to brief and then moving to deadlines. The parties can brief any issues that you see fit. It would be helpful for me for the parties to address a couple of issues. And if you have any questions based on what I'm telling you, then we can discuss that. But the first subject would be, in particular, I think for P&M, the points where there remained some disagreement as to staff's recommendations. I believe in Mr. Lewis's testimony, it looked like that was staff's recommendations 4 and 5. But if you can address that in briefing, that would be helpful. Then there's this issue of these purchases for resource adequacy. It would be helpful to get more briefing on that, in particular for essentially on 2 bases. One, how that category would be defined if there was to be an amendment to the guidelines. And then 2, whether there is a compelling justification to exclude those from the guideline limit calculations, I believe as Mr. Lewis has requested. Any questions about those items for briefing? And obviously you can address any other items that you see fit, but those are the items in particular that I still have questions about.
I have none.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rossi, seeing none from you as well?
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then, with respect to the deadlines for briefing, the default deadlines in the rules, 20 days after the filing of the transcript for initial briefs, and then 13 days for response briefs. This is not a case where we have an expedited transcript, so those default times for briefing would stretch us into November, if I'm not mistaken about that. On the other hand, P&M has requested more expedited review of this case, and so I also want to give you the opportunity to respect that. Do you want to expedite the briefing period, or do the parties want to keep those default deadlines as is? I'll, I guess, direct that question first to P&M and then ask Mr. Rossi the same question.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I think consistent with the earlier request, a more expedited period would be appreciated, perhaps something in the realm of 2 weeks.
Okay, for the initial briefs?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rossi, would that be agreeable to you?
Yes, that's agreeable. A 2-week deadline is, I think, reasonable.
Okay. So in that case, what I would then propose would be a 2-week period for the initial briefs, again, following the submission of the transcript. I'm not sure if the parties will be doing rebuttal briefs or response briefs, but what we did in another case along these lines was, I think, 7 days for a response brief. Would that be reasonable, P&M or Mr. Atencio, Mr. Rossi?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So then we'll do it that way. So we'll do 14 days for the initial briefs, 7 days for the response, if you choose to file that. And what I'll do, consistent with what I've done in another recent case with P&M, is I'll just issue an order As soon as the transcript is filed, just confirming that that will be the deadlines and giving you those specific dates. So with that, with briefing addressed, any remaining issues from either party that we need to address while we're still on the record?
No, sir.
Not from staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Atencio, Mr. Rossi, and Mr. Lewis and Dr. Zadalis. My sincere thanks to both parties today for your participation. And with that, this hearing is adjourned and we're off the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Lee. I appreciate you staying with us this morning and forgiving me for not taking a break.
You bet, Judge. Good luck,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.